Hey everyone, I'm working to hit 2,000 subscribers and I need your help to get there. If you enjoy the content, please hit that subscribe button right now.
All right, faithful, we've got two genuinely fascinating stories to break down today. The first is something every fan has probably been quietly thinking about but maybe hasn't wanted to say out loud. The second is a fascinating look ahead at a potential future move that could completely reshape this offense down the road. Let's dig into both. Let's start with the present, because after looking at everything surrounding this roster heading into camp, there's one question genuinely worth a serious conversation. We all know how brutal last season was. It felt like every single week another key player was going down. This wasn't just losing role players. This team lost real foundational pieces. Both defensive superstars went down at different points, the emotional leader of the offense was lost for the year, and even young contributors and rookies simply couldn't stay healthy. It became genuinely difficult to play the brand of football this roster is built for. The good news is that heading into this training camp, this team is finally in a considerably better place. The roster is healthier, the stars are back, and expectations are rising again. But here's a question worth sitting with. Out of Nick Bosa, Fred Warner, and George Kittle, which returning superstar should actually concern this fan base the most heading into this season? Let's start with Bosa, because honestly, this is probably the single biggest storyline of the entire offseason. This wasn't just another injury recovery. This was another torn ankle, and when you include his high school career, it becomes the third ankle injury of his entire football life. That's a genuinely scary number for anybody, regardless of talent level. To be fair, modern medicine has completely transformed how players recover from these injuries, and we've watched plenty of stars return looking every bit like themselves again. Nobody's suggesting he can't get back to true Defensive Player of the Year caliber football, but expecting him to immediately dominate right out of the gate in Week 1 might genuinely be asking too much. And that's exactly where the real concern comes in. This pass rush simply wasn't the same last season without him consistently collapsing the pocket, and opposing quarterbacks had far too much time to operate, which affected this entire defense. Now let's talk about Fred Warner. His absence last season revealed something this fan base has known for years but maybe took for granted a little. He isn't just the best linebacker in football. He's the true quarterback of this defense, the communicator, the emotional leader, the guy making sure everyone's lined up correctly before every single snap. When he wasn't on the field, you could genuinely see the difference. This defense lost some of its core identity, communication broke down more frequently, and the secondary simply didn't look as organized. Thankfully, this specific recovery doesn't carry anywhere near the same level of concern as a torn ankle. Everything currently points toward him being fully ready once the season begins, and this type of injury is generally considerably easier to bounce back from than some of the other major injuries around this roster. Honestly, there's not much real worry here. As long as he's healthy entering Week 1, there's every reason to expect the same all-pro caliber linebacker this league has watched dominate year after year. Then there's the toughest evaluation of the three, George Kittle. This one honestly creates the most genuine nervousness. Not because anybody questions his toughness, nobody does. He's exactly the kind of player who would try to play through almost anything. The real concern is the injury itself. An Achilles injury is incredibly difficult for any player to fully overcome, and for someone over 30 years old specifically, history tells us that recovery can become even more challenging when it comes to returning to true peak form. That's exactly what makes this situation so genuinely hard to predict. On one hand, medical advances have helped players return faster than ever before. On the other, Achilles injuries have traditionally been among the toughest injuries for veteran players specifically to fully overcome. Anything about him over the years, it's that he'll do everything in his power to be out there with his teammates. But sometimes protecting a player from himself is genuinely part of a coaching staff's job. So if you're asking which of these three creates the most real concern, the honest answer probably has to be a combination of the top two. Bosa carries the biggest overall impact on whether this defense returns to a true elite level. Kittle carries the injury that creates the most genuine uncertainty given his age and the specific nature of Achilles' recovery. Warner, meanwhile, is genuinely the one to worry about least, since everything currently points toward him returning as the same dominant leader this fan base has come to expect. Now let's shift to the second story, because this one looks considerably further down the road, but it's genuinely fascinating to think about. Believe it or not, NFL front offices are already thinking ahead to the 2027 free agent class, and one specific name is already generating real buzz around the league: Puka Nacua. If that all-pro receiver actually reaches free agency in 2027, league observers believe this organization could realistically be one of the most aggressive teams pursuing him. And once you actually picture that fit, it's genuinely hard not to get excited. He's become one of the most complete receivers in the entire league because he genuinely does everything well. He's physical, he's an outstanding route runner, he's incredibly tough, and he's one of the best receivers in the league after the catch. Those traits sound like they were almost custom-built for this specific offensive system. Picture him lining up all over the formation, creating mismatches, moving before the snap, and forcing defenses to constantly adjust to an entirely unpredictable weapon. That's exactly why so many people believe he'd be a genuinely perfect fit here. And here's where things get even more exciting: the idea of pairing him alongside Mike Evans. Evans remains one of the league's premier outside receivers and one of the best red zone threats in all of football. His size, catch radius, and ability to win contested catches would complement Nacua's versatility. Precise route running and explosive after-the-catch ability perfectly. Instead of two receivers doing essentially the same thing, you'd have two genuine stars with completely different strengths fitting together beautifully. One dominates outside and wins jump balls. The other creates separation, moves around the formation, and turns short passes into massive gains. League executives genuinely believe very few receiver duos would present a bigger nightmare for opposing defensive coordinators than that combination. Of course, there's an important reality check worth applying here. This entire scenario hinges on him actually reaching free agency in the first place. A lot can realistically happen before then. He could sign a long-term extension. His current team could simply decide they're never letting him leave. The market could shift entirely after this season. This roster could look considerably different by the time any of this becomes relevant. There are simply too many unknowns to treat this as anything close to a done deal. Still, it's genuinely easy to understand the real interest if that opportunity ever became a reality. This organization has made real aggressive moves before when it believed the roster had a legitimate championship window, and adding a player of that caliber wouldn't just be another signing. It would be a genuine statement of intent about surrounding this offense with elite talent for years to come. Put both of these stories together, and they actually tell a lot about exactly where this franchise stands right now. The first story is entirely about the present. This roster doesn't need to reinvent itself to become a real contender again. It doesn't need some miracle turnaround or a full rebuild. What it needs is something it simply didn't have for most of last season: health. If Bosa returns to being the dominant force this league has watched for years, this entire defensive front becomes more dangerous. If Warner comes back playing at his usual elite level, this defense gets its true leader and heartbeat back. And if Kittle can fully overcome the challenge of an Achilles recovery, this offense gets back one of the most unique weapons in all of football. Those three players aren't just individual stars, they're genuine culture setters, the true identity of this entire football team. That's exactly why the biggest real victory heading into this training camp might simply be seeing those specific names back out on the practice field together. And the second story shifts attention entirely toward the future. A genuinely fascinating storyline worth monitoring even with so many real variables still in play. But at the end of the day, everything comes back to this upcoming season first. Before anyone starts dreaming about future free agents, This team has real unfinished business. After the disappointment of last season, there's genuine pressure on this organization to prove that year was the exception, not the beginning of some larger decline. The talent is still very much here. The coaching remains elite, the defensive core is finally getting healthy, and the locker room remains full of veterans who genuinely understand what it takes to compete for championships. Now it's simply about putting all of those pieces back together. So there you have it, faithful, a genuine mixed bag of excitement and cautious optimism heading into this season. Real anticipation to watch these three stars return to full strength, and a genuinely fun long-term storyline worth dreaming about down the road. So let us know down in the comments, which injury concerns you the most heading into this season? Nick Bosa, Fred Warner, or George Kittle? And would you actually pursue Puka Nacua in 2027 if he ever reaches the open market? Or would you build this roster differently? We want to hear it all. If you enjoyed today's discussion, make sure to hit that like button, and if you haven't already subscribed, go ahead and join the community so you don't miss a single update. Stay safe, and as always, go Niners!